I'm Porpentine, and I'm a female woman, and I am a columnist for Rock Paper Shotgun, curator on free indie games, and I also write games from a queer and feminist and trans perspective, and some other stuff. But anyways, what do I mean by radical play? Honestly, I guess it was just a way to not prepare and just have a title that could encompass anything, but it also does mean something, which is, I mean, another word you could use is revolutionary, but these words, I feel, all have connotations squished into them by society that are pretty negative. So I'll be more explicit and say that which is capable of actually changing the status quo, as opposed to being an empty token signifier of change. So as we become more visible as queers, as LGBT, as however we choose to identify or not identify, we will be asked to assimilate and to compromise and to let other people create those depictions for us. So I think it's really important right now to think critically about when we play games, when we make games, whether we are going with the status quo or against it. So by radical, do I mean all games must be a certain way? No, it is more that I wish for them to be informed by radical sensibilities, to be educated on the issues. An analogy would be that I don't want all food to taste a certain way. It is that I want all food not to have poison in it when I'm eating it, so I don't die or feel like shit. Like, okay, I mean, if we're going to be, a lot of these games are going to be triggering, traumatizing, or just making people feel lesser. Like, that's what we have to pick from a lot of the time. Like, maybe we like a game in a bunch of other ways, but we have to deal with these terrible depictions of ourselves that we come up against. And I don't want us to have to rely on gatekeepers. I'd rather, I don't know, it just fucking sucks having to have your hand out for scraps, or, oh God, those, like, social media, oh, it's fine. Those social media storms where people are having these big, you know, arguments over the latest thing that some straight, white, cis dude did. And you know, that's kind of interesting, I guess, but that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in getting people to reform who have no fundamental stake. I mean, I'd rather just have it be coming from us, like, instead of waiting. Games about marginalized people must come from marginalized people. Like, you have all these Facebook games about social issues that are designed by people who aren't really invested in those social issues, and they're still Facebook mechanics. You have AAA games that are like, just, okay, so like, the thing about, I'm not interested in a Call of Duty where your protagonist is a gay, white, cis male as opposed to a straight white cis male. That's not a victory, that's just assimilation. That's still not our stories. Like, we do not need their token depictions or strong female characters. I mean, I really disagree with the way the discourse is about that, because I don't want strong female characters, and I don't want weak female characters. I just want female characters, or whatever kind of characters, who are related truthfully to their struggles, saying something truthful. Because strong to me does not mean badass or hot or can kill all the HPs of a whole room of dudes, because that doesn't say anything to me in real life. I'm never taking anyone's HPs in real life. Instead, I'm dealing with a whole bunch of other shit. I guess a good rule for designing female characters is, would a man ever be put in that situation? Like, okay, would a dude's character be being built by quivering in skimpy clothing as he is threatened with sexual assault. And, you know, you're not really going to see that. So what I believe in is giving space to marginalized people, giving tools to marginalized people instead, and believing in everyone as a creator, and not waiting around for big corporations or privileged people to throw us scraps under the table. But another thing that's important to realize is that out there, you know, we are all oppressed. But in here, we can oppress each other, and just because we're oppressed in one way doesn't mean we can't be oppressing each other in some other way, because there's all these axes of oppression. So, I don't know, it's easy to, you know, realize that, yeah, we're all bullied out there, but it's harder to realize that in here, in these spaces, we can have advantages over each other. So it's not just AAA people, but it's us who also have to yield space and tools and signal boost people who can speak better for themselves. But I say tools, and what I feel is that a lot of tools can be pretty good, but they are still coming from the point of view of a programmer, not from the average person. I mean, we've seen things like RPG Maker, RenPy, Game Maker, and these are all cool, and I've used a lot of them. But my favorite example would be something like Twine, and I'd like to see more like that. And if you don't know what Twine is, it's a very simple text adventure making program, and you can just share your games really easily with people, and it doesn't require any code. But I'm not just interested in that, I'm interested in more things like that, in a change in the way we perceive these things, and not just looking at these details. But Twine did two very important things that I would like to see in more tools, in that when people were getting into Twine, it did two things, and the first was that it let people who were tired and dealing with shit have the time to make games, because it didn't have this big overhead. When I was really tired and dealing with depression, I was able to actually make things and feel good about them. And like, it lets those voices get out there, the voices that are too tired to deal with all this gatekeeper shit. But that brings me to my next point, which is it gave people, including me, the joy of that fundamental act of creation, which is sadly missing from a lot of our culture. Because our culture shits on people for creating. It shits on the average person for making things. We're told that the first thing we ever make has to be perfect, and that artists are born in this perfect chrysalis, and they just emerge as a perfect artist. But that's not true. Art is practice and having support and the conditions to make art and so many other things. And especially in games, there can be too much of this hypercriticality towards people who are just trying to make games. And I just see that pressure a lot, and I've experienced it too. So that brings me to my next point, which is culture. And to illustrate that point, I'll talk about something called HyperCard, which is a software program that was designed decades ago and packaged on every Macintosh computer. And the thing about HyperCard is that it felt kind of like Twine to me in that it was so easy to use. And the idea is that it's a bunch of virtual pages that can be connected to each other, kind of like Twine. Like, okay, I'm like opening up HyperCard right now, and I'm gonna like draw a button. And that button, you click on it, and it goes to page 17. And page 17 is where an ogre kills you. So you can see you could like make games in it pretty easily, make calculators, educational software, whatever. So then what happened is that Apple squashed that and didn't let anyone touch the source code, and they haven't touched it since. And they've evolved into what you know today as Apple, which is the company that wants you to be taking their shit, but not making your own shit. And you're not gonna be seeing stuff like HyperCard around. So this illustrates the fact that, not just in this case, but in every case, we have the technology, but culture has not caught up to the technology. We are not valuing giving people these simple tools. Instead, it's like dumping shit into photorealism, into voice acting, into long plots, into 3D, just all these things people are taught they have to make a legitimate game. And that is simply not right. So we need to shift our values away from long and gatekeeping, because okay, like what does long mean? Long means that a company wants you to feel like it's worth $60 to play it, so they pad all that shit out, like 2/3 of the game. So, or voice acting, you know, who can afford that stuff? 3D and just like photorealism. Photorealism is something that you're not really going to notice. It's not going to make that plot any better. It's more for the benefit of hardware companies. So, yeah, we need more tools because creation is a fundamental drive. Like creation is like, I don't know, making stuff is it's like dancing and breathing and singing. It's not for just these people over here, like the few. It is something that we can all use as therapy and expressing ourselves. Like when I've been most depressed and dealing with shit I couldn't handle any other way, like creating actually tipped me over from that magical, it's that magical peak of like, nothing is ever going to get better. It's like, oh, I've actually put this out in the world in a way that's not traumatizing to me and synthesized it into something. But now I'm just going to talk about like actual games and actual examples. And I don't want to be like saying that these games are the perfect idea of a radical game, just that they espouse some kind of radical principle. So I grabbed some, and Dog Eat Dog by Liam Burke is a pencil and paper game. And it is about colonialism in the Pacific Islands. And the players take on the roles of the natives and the oppressor. But the really cool rule that it starts with, before the game starts, is that the richest player takes on the role of the oppressor. And I thought that was really cool because, I don't know, in games you have this whole thing where people are just separating fantasy from reality. But, you know, it's all, you know, games come from reality. People are operating off, you know, these existing paradigms of politics and intrigue and history, which of course repeats itself. So it's important to talk about privilege, important to talk about who has the money, who is privileged in this current time at your table. And I think this is a good game to make people uncomfortable with. People should feel uncomfortable when they're talking about these things and not just being like, oh no, I'm not part of the problem. Because we're all part of the problem in some way. So it's uncomfortable, but it's also fun. A rule that I really like about it is, okay, so there's this rule where you design the names of the natives' culture and the empire, and you go around the players getting like syllables. So like, let's try that. So like, what's the first syllable for the natives' culture? Soft? Oh, okay. Like that? Cool. Okay, what's another one? Cal? And another one? Ma? And a fourth one? Cool, thank you. Okay, so Kalmaum, which is an interesting name. And it's like way more fun for me than just rolling a dice and like picking off some random chart table. It just creates something that's completely new. But, so let's try the empire now. So what's the first syllable for like the oppressive empire? A? Day? And a second one. Zach? Third one. Row? And a fourth one. Ta. So let's compare these. So we have Sakalmaum, and then we have De Zakrauta. And I usually notice that the empire's name always sounds a little eviler. Like it's got that Z in there. Last time we had a lot of X's too. And I mean, yeah, these So it kind of reveals like what we view of as, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it can definitely reveal existing tropes and stereotypes that we have. And I don't know. It's a really interesting rule for a lot of different reasons. But anyways, once you start the game, it has this whole, each scene starts with a rule. And the first rule is that the only mandatory rule at the beginning is that the natives are inferior to the oppressor. And you build from that. And with each scene, you develop a new rule based on what you notice about what's going on. And when the natives break the rules, they lose their tokens, because the main thing is you have these tokens. And when you lose all those tokens, you just are taken out. And so it's kind of a serious game in that respect as well. It's a lot of different things. But you can also get tokens. And getting tokens signifies assimilation. And assimilation is a really important topic to be talking about because, it's talking about the fact that it's not just these cartoonish, evil versus bad battles. That's not how it plays out. It plays out so much more humiliatingly and just stealing identities and what's worse than dying is being changed and shamed. And all oppressed people are told they have to assimilate. And it's hard not to, but it's worth figuring out how we can fight assimilation. So it's definitely a really thoughtful game. So I should talk about some Twine games. So let's use the internet. So, knife grips tight in my pocket, death grips blaring in my headphones, volume high as it goes. Praying don't die phone, I might lose my nerve. Every headlight behind me, I just want to curl into a tight ball behind a bush. Please don't see me. But I'm 250 pounds, over 6 feet. Any movement is suspect. I want to make a call to wake my grandmother to get me. I can't make the walk. Sweat-coated face, damn near running uphill. Hope I'm still the monster nobody wants to touch. Heart racing and loveless, remembering the shots. And the body found just a few blocks away early this month. Now the pulse in my ears has mingled with the beat. Passing streetlights to see my shadow alone is relief. But when it sways, my only thought is any car could be the one to turn the corner, spin, cut the lights, and, as I cross, come gunning. Twist my thumb to fold the blade out, feel the metal. Cool against my heated thoughts, less a weapon than a talisman. Pray to the brand on its edge for protection. Winchesters, my angel tonight, no question. Think over my life, make peace. Had a good run, didn't finish what I set out to, but so it goes. Hit the block, get home safe in the door. My cousin asks how I'm doing. So I tell her everything. And it goes, oh, I'm all right. So that's what I'm talking about, like Twine being used both to make a game that people would call not a game because it's low in interactivity, but to make a game telling the story of a black male going home and like talking about that fear. I mean, especially in light of recent events. I mean, even less than gender in games, people of color are talked about even less. So I'm really interested in tools that are telling these stories way more than what we're seeing in the mainstream media. And I could go on about Twine, but I'm going to move to the next thing because I've already talked about Twine a lot in my life. Apocalypse World is another pencil and paper RPG, and I think it's like just the best, not the best, but like one of the most defining story games, tabletop games, I guess, whatever term you want to use, that we've seen in a while, and I think it will set trends for a while. And it's by Vincent Baker. And what's cool about it is that in it, gender is not like, oh, male or female. Gender is a toolkit of presentations, expressions, how you choose to express yourself. And the way you dress and like your expression facially, and just like, so it's like feminine, masculine, ambiguous, transgressing. It's not saying that you're hardwired to anything. It's just saying, how do you choose to be? And that's really important as like a trans woman, and I'm sure many people can identify with wanting to be a certain way that is not how they perceive to be hardwired. And a cool quote I like is that, by the creator, is that it doesn't assume straight as the default. Like, you can be straight if that's your kink, but like, it's not assuming that straight is, you know, the best, which is how it is in our culture. We assume man, straight, white, is the best and how everything's supposed to be. But the system is really fun too. What I like about the system is that it's kind of like, moves are like these multiple choices, these options that you build, and it's not, okay, if I'm gonna attack someone, it's not that I'm whittling down their HP and it's the same for everyone. Instead, it's more like, okay, I attack someone and I do some damage, right? Because attacking hurts people. But I can choose to do more damage to them, to really hurt them. Or I can just be choosing to try to scare them, to try to gain control of the situation. And in that way, these nuances resemble the way stories are, not like soulless numeric game systems. And I feel really alienated from a lot of RPGs. It's like, okay, now we're going to spreadsheet mode. And that's not, I don't know, that's not a really good way to make me feel the import of a battle. In Apocalypse World, combat is for a reason, because you hate someone, because there's a love triangle that went bad, because you want drugs, you want to defend your post-apocalyptic fortress. So anyways, that's really cool. I make games too, and for me, what's important about making games is that, I don't know, like, I have very specific reasons for making games. One is that I want my stories to like bite back and have curves and folds and unfold at the cadence I want them to. So that's something specific I was looking for, because I don't believe we should just, I don't know, I think we should think about why we're making games maybe. Because there's so many different tools we can be using that we should be looking at. But more importantly is, it was a way for me, okay, because there's lots of other trans designers, right, who make amazing things and inspire me. But I also want my own stories, because there's never enough stories. Not every trans experience is alike. Trans experiences are as infinite as any other kind of experience. I want to be talking about like what it's like for me to be on hormones, that it's okay for trans women to have cocks and like having cocks. Having an intense sexuality as a woman, especially a trans woman, where your sexuality is kind of like, it's either not there and you can't have sex, or it's demonized and deceptive. Another thing I do is, that's important to me at least, is having the identities be kind of incidental and writing as if we were already in that better world. And I don't know, a lot of dudes play my games and they're like, talking about how the protagonist was male, and none of my protagonists are male. But because I didn't put a pink bow on it and like, you know, say that the protagonist is female right away, they didn't, I mean, there are details in there, but you have to look at them, and they're written with the naturalness, I guess, as if it were, you know, the naturalness you'd expect from assuming the default is a white, straight, cis male. So yeah, I made a game called Cyber Queen about, like, it's like System Shock, except if Shodan won and she was just really horny and sapphic. I made a game called Crystal Warrior Kesha that is kind of weaving together the mythology of pop star Kesha into this battle against transdimensional haters. I don't know, but the point is I was able to tell tons of different stories, and I was able to tell them my way. And I really like everyone to be able to have that experience. So last game here is, oh wait, is it in desktop? Oh no, it comes with a folder. But I can, oh, Bing, why? Very sneaky. Oh, that won't take too long. Okay, I'll talk about the next thing I was going to talk about, wallet downloads. And do this all out of order. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is that it's not enough to just go and be like, just go make games. I don't think that's fair. I think for some people that's fair, but it's not enough to just say go make games. We also have to be thinking about the conditions by which we make games. Like, okay, depression, trauma, harassment, poverty, these things hold me back, like lack of medical care. These are the things that hold me back. Those are conditions that I need to improve to make more games. So I believe in alternative power structures. Like Dames Making Games in Canada is a good example, I think, because they explicitly define a safe space, a feminist safe space. And we need to be serious about it and be defining these things. Because, okay, when I first came to games, I didn't have any place to talk about my games, any place to share my games, to test my games. Because all these communities were really intimidating from the outside. And I just was looking at them and seeing all these, like, you know, straight cis dudes who are kind of like maybe sometimes talking in a kind of negative way about women and just not feeling it. And, you know, maybe some of these could have been good on the inside once I got to know them. But the important thing is that communities demonstrate safety from the outside. Because who do we want in our communities? We want the people who are tired and have low emotional energy, who have just been beaten down, the people for whom it's not easy to just constantly be trying out group after group. We have to say, okay, this is a safe space and we're serious about it. And like the thing about safe spaces is that it's not enough to just say it's a safe space, because power is everywhere. If we don't talk about power structures, they will be invisible, but they will still be there. And people who have bad experiences in feminist safe spaces will just be erased because they contradict the illusion of a perfect safe space. There is no such thing as a perfect safe space, only a safer space. And we have to be constantly critical and examining of that. And like, we have to talk about the things that are hard to talk about, abuse and harassment. Not just outside, but inside. Like, it's easy to say, okay, like, these dudes on Reddit are gross. I mean, okay, yeah, that can be pretty obvious. But, like, what about, you know, abuse within feminist communities, abuse where we do feel safe? I don't know. I mean, I think that's something that people should look into and feel safe talking about. Because abuse is a pattern, harassment is a pattern, and we're told that we're alone when it happens to us. But we're not alone. I mean, if it's happened to you, it's happened to other people, and we can be uniting with other people and discussing ways to combat these things and talk about these things and have healing and whatnot in our communities. So it's not safe to take those things for granted, is all I'm saying. We have to be critical. What are other things that are just horrible? I resent seeing everything as a power structure. I resent having to weigh everything in terms of power and realizing how limited at times my own power is to have an effect over my own life and go where I want to go. I resent being told I have to smile all the time. And I think women are told they have to smile and be effusive and appease people. And you know, life is hard. Sometimes we do have to, but it's important also to realize that we don't have to all the time, and that we can be uniting with people who aren't going to make us suck up to them and aren't going to make us sacrifice part of ourselves. So it's important to unite with other radical people. It's okay to like have a shit test and like not smile and just, you know, be yourself. And like, I think women are criticized a lot for not smiling, for not demonstrating like 10 times the amount of enthusiasm that, you know, their male counterparts might have to demonstrate. Ooh, 19 seconds. The excitement is palpable. What? Porpable? That is true. I didn't make enough puns. Wait, where'd you go? 0 seconds. Okay, so Slave of God by Inkrapare is a really cool game. And like the thing is, radical for me isn't just like having a certain message, but also just there's radical design, I think, that hints at very deep things in people. So this is that kind of game. So let's see what happens. So like, let's talk about realistic games. Realism is not realistic. Realistic is just what the mainstream says is realistic. Because like, you know, we get brain damage, we hallucinate, our emotions bleed into our environment, we see red and white hot pain, and we feel blue. Things are not just brown and gray and dusty and rusty and running through the street shooting buildings. It's like, I don't know. Okay, a good example is in a lot of mainstream games, or a lot of games in general, it's not bad, but you will see like drunkenness represented as like this blurry film. And, you know, drunkenness is way more than a blurry film. Drunkenness is emotion. It's feeling this ecstasy of your inhibitions falling for the first time. Or it's this, or despair and depression and crying. And it's all these things. And a lot of games don't represent that. It's like, oh, it's harder for me to avoid this half-elf orc bull stabbing me with its horns, or harder to use WASD or something. And that's not, I don't know, that's not what being drunk is like all the time for me. So, and if there are drugs, they rarely refer to the emotional realities of those drugs. So this, oh, please work. I like you a lot, game. So let's get into a calmer state of mind. So the thing about Slave of God that I really like is that you can see it's representing this thing not just as a film, but it's representing it as this emotional state. You're out and there's all this noise, then you go in. Oh wow. And it's representing these intense connections. And it's the closest game to being drunk in a club that I've ever had. So, and what's cool about it is that, I don't know, it's this, in any other game, that space would be so tiny, right? But that tiny room is transformed, and it has, the architecture is steeped in emotions. And I just think it's so radical that I can get lost in such a tiny space and be experiencing that, such an intensely deep thing. And it's radical to present emotions like that. And I just think it's a really cool game. So in conclusion, I'd say look at sites like free indie games, stuff like that, where, because this stuff is already happening. People are making thousands of games. We don't need to be waiting for other people because this already exists. It's just that we're not covering them in enough quantity. Like, and it's hard because we don't always have access to traditional coverage. When we are covered, it's like patronizing, or it misses the point, or it focuses on a few figureheads of a movement. So we need more sites and more writers valuing these things. And honestly, just, fuck games and do stuff besides play games. Because games are gross. No. But, so is there any Q&A questions? Hi.
As a columnist for Rock, Paper, Shotgun, I just wanted to kind of direct a comment to you. I feel like there is a lack of critical analysis in games journalism, and I just want to thank you first for your contribution to kind of offsetting that.
Oh, yeah.
And then, thank you.
Oh, cool.
Then as to my question, so everybody can hear it, I actually wanted to go back to the example of dog eat dog, and you said that the first rule of the game is that the oppressed are actually inferior to the oppressors.
Oh, did I say that wrong? I meant to say that the natives are inferior to the oppressed.
Yeah, the natives are inferior to the oppressed.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of like translated it in the general terms.
Oh yeah.
But
I get what you mean.
like, have there ever been, like, in your experiences, have there ever been debates on that? Have there ever been like, no, maybe we should play it as the natives are superior to the oppressors, and somehow, that the oppression does not, inferiority does not, lead to oppression. Or as somebody that is oppressed, you're not exactly inferior to who's, getting down.
Well, to clarify, I think it's that the rule is saying, like, the rules are kind of from the perspective of the oppressor, I believe, and it's like they believe that they are superior. Like, certainly there's no innate inferiority, it's just that's what all oppressive cultures believe. Is that a good example in the book actually is that it doesn't have to be evil. You can play the Peace Corps, you can play whatever, but the thing about being oppressed is you don't have to want to be evil. You just have to believe you are better. And most evil shit is not outright malicious. It's just not even caring about the opinions of the people they're oppressing. So, yeah.
So a lot of the folks in this room are people who could help you create, or could help be in a position to create the next tools of game developers. And you mentioned that you felt that the tools were designed from the perspective of the programmer and not necessarily the creators. Do you have a vision for what those tools might look like, or if you could create a perfect tool to tell your stories, do you know what that might look like?
I'd definitely say, look at things like HyperCard and Twine. I think any bloat in a game is going to be too much. What may seem like a little thing to someone who comes from a programming background might be a big thing to someone who just wants to make a game. A good example would be how in Twine, in the first 10 seconds, you can start writing. I don't have to mediate that experience with building, a framework or whatever. So, I don't design tools, so I'm not the perfect person to ask, but maybe good to ask in some ways. So yeah, I know there are people working on things like HyperCard right now. I know Twine 2 is actually being worked on, and it's going to be in a browser, which I think is even better. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah, I definitely want more than just Twine. I want the Twine of 3D games, RPGs, and Twine of everything, basically. So thank you. Yeah, you'll have to fight.
When it comes to making interesting, radical characters for video games, you have a history of, particularly when it comes to breaking the heteronormative expectation of the cisgendered white male. You have the use of trickery to surprise the player into playing a unexpected character. I think of Metroid and the revelation of Samus being a female character revealed at the very end of the game. In your opinion, is that kind of trickery degrading to this kind of radical play that you're looking for? Or is it a tool to be used in order to change the perspective of the heteronormative culture?
That's an interesting question. I think in this day and age, for the most part, what I'd like to see is just women having these roles without any kind of gimmick or trickery around it. I don't know. I certainly do hear a lot of talk about how can we use games in a way that subverts things? So I think there is room for subversion, but I'm mostly interested in just acting like that stuff, that problem doesn't exist, because I feel we can like get stuck on lampshading things and just, you know, referring to the states of oppression rather than just going straight to like, okay, in my game, you know, women are not, you know, just put in the refrigerator. They're not just gimmicks. So I don't know, it'd have to be very specific. I don't think as a trend. I think as a trend, I'd rather see just games starting with women and whatnot. So thank you, yeah. Oh, like right now? Okay, all right, thanks a lot for coming. Have a good day.